Hello, everyone. Welcome to GLI's webinar series. Today's topic is cybersecurity. What is working, what is not, and why you should care. My name is Joseph Bunevith. I'm Vice President of Government and Regulatory Affairs here at GLI, and I have four distinct panelists with me. I'll let them introduce themselves, starting with my top left square here, Lee.
Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you. My name is Lee Copello. I'm the Director of iGaming Compliance for the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board.
And Paul?
Hi, everyone. Paul Resch, Director of Gaming Operations for the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board. In Pennsylvania, we have 17 land-based casinos and 22 iGaming and online sports wagering operators.
And Melissa.
Good morning, Joe. My name is Melissa Aarskaug. I'm the Vice President of Gaming on the technology arm of GLI called Bulletproof. I've been with the organization for going on 12 years next month. Happy to be here today.
Gus?
Hello, my name is Gus Fritschie. I'm the Senior Vice President of Bulletproof's Information Security Services Division with global responsibility for delivery of our cybersecurity services. Have been in the cybersecurity field for over 25 years. Happy to be here.
So we have a pretty wide audience here, and cybersecurity is this macro word. It's an enormous word that encompasses all sorts of different things. So I wanted to ask, I'll start with Gus. Gus, can you give us some kind of next level topics within that huge word? Because all I sit here and think about when I hear the word cybersecurity is a green screen like the Matrix and watching all this code go by and not understanding it.
No, absolutely, Joe. And I think that's part of the problem, right? We hear the term cybersecurity or penetration testing, vulnerability assessment, and we really don't know what it means. To your point, we think about some hacker behind a keyboard, writing custom code. But what is it really? And how does it relate to security requirements in a regulatory perspective? And I think that's where the problem is. We do not have standardization of these definitions on the requirements or even what it means. And I think part of the problem with this, especially in the gaming industry, is how sports wagering, internet gaming has launched state by state by state, with different states having their own requirements, some referencing, own unique standards, where others leveraging industry, accepted standards. For example, there's a certain requirement in a state's regulation that requires a security integrity assessment. What does that mean? Is it a penetration test? Is it an operational audit? I think we're going to struggle with these challenges that you mentioned, Joe, as far as what is cybersecurity, until we as an industry agree upon what those definitions are, what are the requirements, and how can regulators like Paul and Lee gain assurance that operators, suppliers are doing the right things as it relates to cybersecurity.
And just kind of full disclosure, we actually started planning this a couple of months ago. And as we all know, recently in the news, it's been one of the hottest topics going on in the gaming industry. And I also note that this webinar is actually pre-recorded, but we will have a live Q&A post-broadcast. So I would like to drill down a little bit into some of the things that Gus has brought up and ask, Paul, you have a robust gaming industry to regulate. I mean, you've got every vertical that's basically allowed under federal law. You've got land-based casinos. You've got retail and mobile sports betting, and you've got iGaming as well. And quite often under the current regulatory structure, the cybersecurity requirements are viewed as like checkbox exercise. So how does the PGCB view these, and what value do you see from them?
Well, thanks, Joe. To Gus's point, the whole issue and area of cybersecurity can be daunting to all involved, especially a regulator. In this job, we come to work, Lee and I, every day, and we're subject matter experts in any number of different areas, and we never know what's coming at us next. So it can be daunting as a regulator to dive into the issue of cybersecurity. I remember about 2 years ago having a discussion with Gus about vulnerability assessments and annual security audits. And he was a wealth of information and helped us get our regulatory framework set up to start. And I think that's the key, is from a regulatory perspective or an operator perspective. You have to start somewhere. And so in Pennsylvania, we require these vulnerability scans on a quarterly basis. And I'll let Lee can talk in more detail about those. And we require the annual security audits. And I think from a high level as a regulator, we're able to apply some regulatory pressure, or as I like to say, gentle reminders to the industry of important areas that they should be focusing on to protect the integrity of their operations, their customers, their employees. And we have a shared mission here between the regulators and the operators, because we all want to see this industry continue to grow.
I often say that when I get in these conversations, that everybody's kind of on the same page. We all want regulated gaming to be done in an organized and efficient fashion to protect the consumer, the government agencies, and honestly, the suppliers as well. Like, if we can come from that macro level, we can come to agreements on how to do it. And speaking with kind of how to do it, Gus, can you go over some of the common challenges you see in the cybersecurity and audit processes?
Yeah, I think, and I want to just, follow up on a point that Paul made. And, it was a pleasure, when to assist the PGCB in answering some of their questions. And, and I think that's part of the answer of what needs to change. We need more regulators like the PGCB and Lee to ask the right questions. There's certain regulators that, look at these reports, very closely and ask questions. Often I'll get a call from Lee about what does this mean? It may be one of our reports. It may be something that an operator submitted as part of their remediation plan and wants to just ask advice. I think until we as an industry and regulators specifically, put the emphasis on making sure that the operators, suppliers are performing the testing to the correct level, we're going to face these challenges that we've seen in the news recently. And I'm not saying that regulatory requirements is the end answer. There's a lot more above and beyond those regulatory requirements, but it's a start. And if we don't require it, it's been my experience that it won't get done, which is why I'm glad to see, you mentioned the quarterly vulnerability scans, that I know Lee's involved in making sure that those operators submit those results, adding, those types of requirements. So it's not just a static one-time assessment, but more of a continuous monitoring perspective to verify that these vulnerabilities are getting addressed and remediated are extremely important. I don't think I answered your question, Joe, but I got, sort of off the script, so to speak, but I wanted to make sure I gave credit to the PGCB because they're one of those regulators that go above and beyond. There's others too. Melissa and I were just speaking with the IGRC recently, and they're placing a lot greater emphasis on reviewing the test reports to making sure that all the requirements that they have in their regulations are being implemented. And of course, if we go back to New Jersey, they were sort of at the forefront of requiring these security assessments, both on the online and the land-based side. They are very much focused on making sure that those test results are valid, adequate, the right methodologies being followed, et cetera.
And there's certainly some challenges too, because part of those requirements are really technical, but some of them are run by the internal controls. If you don't know what internal control is, it is what it sounds like, internal control. These are documents and procedures that your organization follows to make sure your cybersecurity stays intact. Am I right, Melissa?
Yes, I love that. I love that internal controls. So when we look at the internal controls and audit, we call it audit across the industry right now. There's different ways to do an audit. In some states, there's the GLI 33B, which is the sports betting side, and GLI 19B, which is the iGaming side. But then some states use cybersecurity standards like NIST or ISO or other frameworks to do these audits. So where Lee and Paul were mentioning the quarterly scanning, so that's the cybersecurity assessment side. There's a secondary piece that's the audit requirement. We look at the policies and procedures and then the frameworks that those casinos, operators, and other vendors have.
Yeah, and can you speak to how those organizations need to strike a balance between compliance and proactive security measures?
I love this question. I have like 10 things that come to mind, but I think most importantly is understanding compliance requirements in the states that you're operating in. So as Gus mentioned, they change from state to state. One state might call it a policy and procedure review, which is just, a policy and procedure review can be one page versus actually going through a NIST assessment or a GLIB audit. So kind of quick top 10 things from my perspective is, outside of understanding the compliance requirements is looking at your organization's security objectives that go beyond compliance requirements, doing regular risk assessments, conducting regular audits, looking at your incident response plans. I know we all hear about, Gus, mentioned a little bit about, MGM this week. Looking at security awareness training for employees seems very important, right? They're the first level of defense within organizations, and creating a security culture that fosters awareness within the organization. Your employees can report suspicious activities and share in the responsibility of security. Kind of the last couple of things that are kind of secondary is third-party risk assessments. Extend your security considerations to your third-party vendors. Make sure they also meet compliance standards and maintain strong security practices. And then looking at your board and executive support, making sure that they are behind you and understand what you're doing. And then just a general statement I mentioned, it's constant and continuous improvement. One security assessment and one audit really gives you the baseline for what will happen year over year, and just realizing that threats are evolving, they're changing, and it's important that you stay informed and up to date on what's going on in the industry.
Through the matrix. Sorry, I was on mute there for a second. So I wanted to say, we're always, it's ever evolving industry. It's kind of for lack of a better term, a whack-a-mole. We keep on moving forward and new things come up and new things change and technology changes and there's vulnerabilities discovered and then there's patches. And we've kind of had this pretty crazy race. I mean, we've all seen, your phone update, whether it be an Android or iOS. They force those updates because for security reasons. You can look right in the notes. It'll say important security update. Make sure you update your phone. But I want to head back over to PGCB here. Lee, can you tell me about the collaboration in your organization between cybersecurity experts and your staff, and how you can improve outcomes and how you keep up with that constant moving, changing demand?
Sure. Thanks, Joe. As Melissa alluded to, technology is ever evolving. So maintaining those open lines of communications between regulators, cybersecurity experts, and operators, it enhances our ability to know what's out there and know what we need to be addressing in a higher priority. One of the things that is difficult is every quarter a scan could be done, and then you'll find new emerging vulnerabilities on the next scan. So as you alluded to, the whack-a-mole is the end game. So we're just trying to stay focused and continually push forward there. As technology evolves, we try to evolve with it.
And Paul, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just building off of something that Melissa said and that Lee said, the tone in any organization comes from the top. And if the general manager of one of our land-based casinos or the CEO of one of our online operators places an emphasis on information security, as well as the board above them, that filters down to the rest of the organization. And it is so important for education and awareness, as Melissa said, for employees to be on the lookout for all sorts of social engineering tactics that are being used right now. And even in our own organization at the PGCB, we have tests that go out, test emails that go out to all of our employees. And I think that's so important, because what we're seeing in some of these incidents is that that's exactly how these threat actors are getting in. They're getting in through the front door, not through some war games scenario like you saw on in the movies. And to Lee's point too about how do we keep up to date, just this week, Lee and I had a call with the Ontario regulators there for gaming, and they were able to share best practices with us on some incidents that occurred there in their land-based casinos some months ago. And they were also discussing with us the recent breach that occurred at Caesars. And that type of information sharing among states, to Gus's point, standardization among regulations can benefit the industry, can benefit the cybersecurity experts that are doing this work. And we're looking to Nevada as well with the regulation that they recently came out with. And we're gonna, Pennsylvania there's still work to do here in Pennsylvania. We feel like we have a good start in iGaming, but the next area of emphasis for us is land-based casinos and making sure our land-based casinos are strengthening their systems against cyber incidents.
And I just want to add a quick note here. You did bring up this term, social engineering. Many people might not know what that is. I got actually really lucky a good 15 years ago to be socially engineered. And why I say lucky is because it changed my entire landscape of how I handle my personal security, password protection, and that. And I'll tell a really quick story. I was in an AIM chat talking with an individual that was looking to hire me for some consulting. And all he did is he asked me what was the best food he could eat it for a hangover. And I typed in chat, eggs. And as soon as I typed that word, I was logged out of my Skype. And I was sitting there going like, what just happened? I can't get in. Well, what is your favorite food? Eggs. So over the couple months prior, I looked back at the chat. He had found out where I grew up, where I was born, where I lived, what my daughter's name was, and what my favorite food was. And those questions, seriously, a 6-month process. He was able to steal my Skype and then tap into my network and start asking them for money as me. True story. It was kind of crazy, but I was, quote, lucky it happened. Lucky I realized something weird happened and also moved quickly to mitigate it. So that's what social engineering is, and it can happen to you. So you got to be really careful of what kind of information you do give. So now when I answer those questions, where was I born? I answer pizza. Because that's going to be that's not actually my word, but I mix the words up and I write them down so they are extra secure. They're not actually real answers.
What's your password, Joe? Is it password or?
No,
Oh, okay.
It's password 1. Go ahead, Gus. You wanted to add to what Lee and Paul had said here?
Yeah, just a couple points I just wanted to jump off of. Lee, sort of made that point when they get those vulnerability scans and they get the remediation reports, and it always seems to be a new vulnerability that's popping up. And I think this points back to, why just the act of vulnerability scanning, these static, penetration tests are not effective as far as really strengthening our overall security postures. Because until you fix the reason that you keep on having these different but similar types of problems with vulnerabilities, is you have to look at the overarching breakdowns that are occurring in either configuration management, patch management, vulnerability management. And that's where you need to Melissa's point, where she mentioned there's a different areas to focus on when you do those reviews, from both the technical penetration testing, but also I think even more importantly, those operational security control assessments where you verify and determine, are they really managing, implementing effective security programs? And that's where the industry also needs to move forward. We have too many states and jurisdictions that just require a penetration test or some technical assessment, and that leaves too much open for interpretation. We need to do better. We need to have more requirements to verify that the operators, suppliers are implementing effective security. And part of this, is our fault, from a testing vendor perspective too. And, I'll just, pick on, we need to come up with those standards and make it easy for regulators to adopt and implement. Obviously, we mentioned, GLI 33, GLI 19B have security components. To Paul's point, other, jurisdictions will mention ISO, SANS top 20 critical controls. So we get these inconsistencies, and we have GLI 27, which is a security control standard in gaming. It's outdated currently. It's in the process of being developed, enhanced to meet the modern cyber threat landscape that we see. And hopefully that will be some guidelines that regulators, if they want to, could adopt and then create the standardization across the industry. And that's what operators want. I talk to operators every day, and they're confused because they have to go from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, try to understand, interpret what those requirements are. They do one thing in jurisdiction A, they have to do something else in jurisdiction B. It's in different time frames, and their budget ends up being spent more on checking boxes versus implementing real security. So we're also part of the problem, but I think we have a solution that will be coming out that will help the industry move forward and strengthen those security controls. So that's really the point I wanted to add just on that, Joe.
That's great stuff, Gus. So Melissa, kind of on that topic, as you work with operators to help them meet their regulatory requirements, what kind of mistakes do you see happening?
I think Gus alluded to it, just misinterpreting requirements. If you don't understand, what does a security assessment mean? Is it an internal, an external? Are you looking at pen testing? Are you just scanning the environment? I think there's not a level playing field from state to state. So if you don't understand what you have to do, it's hard to do it. And then just lack of adequate security assessment. So failing to conduct a comprehensive risk assessment can result in overlooking critical vulnerabilities and threats. Compliance requirements should align with your organization's unique risk profile. And then ignoring emerging threats. I think some of the recent attacks, I would say that there has been signs. And I think in the gaming industry, we're, to the next thing that really, once you have these findings, to look at them, to address them, potentially to do table topic exercises internally. Do we accept this risk? What do we need to do from here? And then I think we're guilty in the industry of relying solely on checkbox exercises, that we're neglecting remediation and actually doing the work after the assessments. And it doesn't just involve the IT departments. It involves the entire organization. I always say that cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility in an organization. It's regulators, it's the individual operators, suppliers. It's our responsibility. Kind of a couple other key things are people are not updating their policies or patching after these assessments. I know I was speaking with a regulator recently, and they mentioned that they love that we are very transparent in what we're doing in our report. So it says, we've conducted this type of assessment, and it's clear. Gus mentioned an integrity assessment, a security assessment. What exactly does that mean? And I think, I challenge the regulators, state regulators, and tribal regulators to actually look at these reports and what is being done, and making sure that the individual operators and suppliers are remediating them to the best of their ability, and not assume that compliance equals security. But if you are secure, you will be compliant. And I think that's the kind of, one last point, trust but verify, I always say, comes to mind.
Yes, we actually have a good coworker of mine, Thorsten Toms. He has a scrolling marquee behind him on all our calls that says trust but verify. It's a fantastic approach. But Gus, you wanted to add?
Yeah, just to piggyback off Melissa's point, and I want to challenge, Paul and and his colleagues in the regulatory space, because it really falls on them. We can go and do very detailed assessment work, identify vulnerabilities, provide that to the operators. They develop their remediation plan. But if no one's holding them accountable, then it's almost like nothing happened. And I'll tell a quick story, and this has nothing to do with PGCB, and I'm not going to name the jurisdiction, but it was in land-based. And, one year we found a vulnerability that allowed us to get access to the gaming floor from the hotel wireless network. That was identified in a report as critical finding. We briefed the operator, that got submitted to the regulator. Next year we come back, and what do you think we found? The same problem. And it's amazing that was still present. And it wasn't until the third year that it finally got fixed. And it's because the regulators weren't challenging the operators and forcing them and asking questions and holding them accountable. We need to hold the industry accountable. Otherwise, there's that risk that this does turn into a checkbox exercise. And I know that's one of the great things why, like I mentioned, I have calls from Lee asking me questions. And, I know the PGCB and there's other regulators that also look at these reports and make sure that these vulnerabilities are tracked. But I just want to bring that up because Melissa's absolutely right. They need to remediate those findings, address those findings. It may not necessarily be fixing it. Maybe they can't fix it. Maybe they have to implement compensating controls in place because it's some application that the vendor doesn't support a newer operating system. That's acceptable, but you have to address the risk somehow.
And one of the key words you brought up right there is the word risk. And it's one of those things, like, happens often, maybe not. But when it does, that risk can be enormous, as we recently seen in the news. So, but with Paul, you wanted to, can you add in on what was brought forward here?
Yeah, just to follow up on Gus's challenge to us as regulators, and we need to hear these things from the industry. Lee and his staff, they review these vulnerability scans that come in, and they review the annual security audits. And we're not subject matter experts, so one of the things that we're looking for are these reports to be in layman terms, in plain English. What's the problem? What's the recommendation for corrective action? What's the operator's response to that? And so Lee can talk more about the type of reports that he sees, but I think the key is that regulators need to ask questions, like Gus said, whether that's through our change management process and the release notes that we review from operators. If we don't understand something in a release note, we're going to ask questions. And it's by asking questions of the operators that they're level of interest in their, commitment to compliance is increased because the regulator is asking follow-up questions about what the finding meant or what the corrective action was. And that holds true not just in cybersecurity, but all aspects of compliance operations.
Yeah, you brought up a term I'd like to quickly define for the people that are watching is change management. Some people are like, well, what is change management? But if you've ever had an app update on your phone and everybody's seen it, you've seen change management in process. And that happens throughout all technology. It happens on the physical floor in a casino when the slot machines or the casino management software gets updated. And it happens quite often in the digital world when the gaming applications, sports betting or iGaming, like your market, Lee and Paul, get updated. And with that comes a process. And you can actually visit gaminglabs.com, and under GLI standards, you'll find the change management process document. It's not one of the standards, but we did put it out there in order to get the digital industry in alignment with how fast it moves and technical compliance. So if you want to learn more about it, head right over there. So, but with that, and given some of the challenges, I'd like Lee or Paul to speak. What kind of positive things have you seen in your organization come out of some of those audits?
I think some of the positives that we see is the industry as a whole in Pennsylvania has a more proactive due diligence towards cybersecurity. We know these quarterly scans are consistently going on, checking for these new risks. And then we get the total package of the annual security assessment, where we see the full reporting breakdown of risk and vulnerabilities that are patched, how they're remediated. It allows us as regulators to become more educated by engaging the operators and following up on these reports and scans to get clarifying items clarified, or just address the questions that we have related to the testing scope and the results of it. So I think that's a major benefit. One of the other things is the use of these quarterly scans allows for the identification of these emerging risks prior to a bad actor being able to exploit them or take advantage of it.
Excellent stuff. Gus, you wanted to add?
Yeah, just wanted to add to Lee's point, and then Paul may have some other items perhaps, but just to give some background behind this vulnerability scanning, the quarterly, because Pennsylvania, I believe, was one of the first to require these quarterly vulnerability scans, and we're seeing other emerging jurisdictions actually adopting that as a requirement too, and it helps the industry move more beyond just that static annual one-time assessment to give that visibility to the regulator on a more frequent basis. And I just want to make sure that those operators and suppliers understand that, and it's clearly stated in Pennsylvania's regs that it doesn't have to be done by a third party, right? You can do it yourself. In fact, the reason that I recommended in my discussions with the PGCB that should be implemented, in my opinion, it's table stakes. You shouldn't be a gaming operator if you're not at least running quarterly vulnerability scans. So this is not introducing any extra burden onto the operators. It's something that they should be doing already. And if they're not, well, it's forcing them to do something that's going to improve their security. I think, our CEO, James Maida, said it well a couple of years ago at one of our regulators roundtable when we were talking about security assessments and what the cost is, which is fairly insignificant when you look at the cost of a breach.
High risk.
Yeah, and he used the terms, this is table stakes. If you want to be in gaming, you need to be doing this. If you want to be in gaming, you need to have security assessments. You need to be taking security seriously, because the integrity of gaming is of the utmost importance. And if we don't have that, we don't have an industry. So I just wanted to make that point, because I know that perhaps some in the industry think that it's a overbearing requirement to have to submit these quarterly reports. But in my opinion, it's something that's being done already, or if not, it needs to be done.
So Gus, I'm going to play a little advocate here. I have say I have a digital application, and I have a robust IT department. We do our own scans, we do our own tests, but I don't know what I don't know. So just give me a very high level, like I need to get a quote vulnerability scan done, and I'm a CEO of this company, and I don't even understand what a vulnerability scan is. How do I move forward there? Melissa or Gus, you want to?
Just from a definition of a vulnerability scan, Joe?
Yeah, sure. Start there. Yep.
I mean, a vulnerability scan is an automated process that identifies vulnerabilities in, the network layer, the server layer, and application layer. And I believe, the way the reg's written in Pennsylvania, it's really focused on that, network infrastructure layer that they need to perform on a quarterly basis. So it's a quick and easy way for organizations to identify vulnerabilities that could be exploited. And I want to be clear that the fact of just running a vulnerability scan doesn't solve anything. If you just take those scan results and check a box that said, yes, I did scan results, and you file it somewhere, you need to have vulnerability management. And that's why the Pennsylvania's requirement to submit a remediation plan, forcing them to make sure that they address those vulnerabilities and come up with a plan on how to address them.
Paul,
I don't know, Paul, if you wanted to add anything else, to the vulnerability scanning or Lee's prior comment about the value, because I know that you see value from having these assessments done from a regulator perspective.
Yeah, no, these vulnerability scans have been incredibly informative to us as an agency. Our role is to protect the gaming public, and this is primarily a business concern, cyber incidents, but it's a shared concern because we all want to see the industry continue to grow. We want customers to have confidence that their data is secured. And with these scans, one of the things we talked about with Gus early on is, there's going to be a lot of these scans coming into us, right? We've got 22 operators. We have over 30 or 40 iGaming manufacturers, and they're all required to submit these scans. And we intend to do the same for our land-based casinos. So for now, we're reviewing them manually. Lee and his team are reviewing them, following up with questions, making sure that corrective actions are being taken. But we're open to using some automation and some things that we want to learn more about to help us manage that process going forward, because it's a lot of work, and we have, like all regulators, we have limited resources.
Dare I say AI, or should we say that for a different webinar? I think we'll save it, or we're going to be here for quite a while. But with that, and speaking like directly to protecting the public is the main job, and like I said, on that macro level, we all want the same thing. But with that, Melissa, how important is it for operators and regulators to select a vendor with gaming experience, including licensing requirements, and should a jurisdiction have minimum requirements in that area?
Thanks, Joe. I have. I guess I'll tell my story now. This year, just talking about 2023, I would say picking an organization that has the industry knowledge is everything. And I think from our perspective this year, my perspective, I've had a number of suppliers that have engaged another vendor outside of GLI and Bulletproof. That vendor did the incorrect scope jurisdictionally. So they tested half of what the regulator wanted, or 25%, or they tested it 30 days later, or just wrong timelines, wrong scope. And that supplier, those suppliers had to redo the work. So they paid once to one company, and they ultimately ended up coming back to us because we tested the correct scope and the correct timelines and the correct requirements. So I think picking a company that has the industry knowledge, I think is key. Making sure they're licensed. All the regulators require you to be licensed to perform this type of work. for speaking for Bulletproof, the technology arm of GLI, we can customize these type of assessments so we can meet what the regulator is asking for and add to what the regulator is asking to, and specifically tailor to their products and their unique needs of the casino. So social engineering is a popular add-on where people are like, we're going to trust but verify that our help desk is not resetting passwords or doing things they shouldn't. So we're able to customize. We have the security expertise, not only in the gaming industry, but other regulated industries like healthcare and voting and state agencies. So we're looking at other ways in other industries that potential hackers are getting into environments. We're able to scale quickly for our suppliers. So if they need an assessment quick, last minute, we're able to do that. And we have a proven track record. I know since I've been at GLI going on 12 years, we've done several security assessments, not only for regulatory purposes, but to tribes, to suppliers that don't have certain compliance certifications, like maybe promotional kiosk. We're able to last two things, we're able to be more cost effective when we assess these over a year period. With there's cost effectiveness with these solutions from jurisdiction to jurisdiction when you pick one vendor to help you. And then we can help through our reports after we finish the work. You're able to implement any of the findings quicker. So those are kind of the key pieces to selecting the right vendor.
And with this being this incredible, fast-moving pace, ever-evolving challenge, how Paul and Lee, how do your staffing experience impact information security and the oversight of the operators?
You want to take that one, Lee, or I can jump in on that. So, yeah, staffing and experience is they're important for regulators. We have a limited staff in our iGaming unit. We have a limited staff in our audit unit, and we're looking to add additional staff so that we can better improve our oversight in this area. As far as experience goes, we're very much looking to hire auditors with information technology background and experience. That's a challenge in a tight labor market. It's a challenge when you work for the government. They're not the highest starting salaries, but just like we learned slot machine gaming in 2006, we learned table games in 2010, we learned iGaming in 2019. We feel that we can train our staff adequately. And there's a regulatory leverage model that we look at, right? All the things that we've talked about here on this webinar, having strong internal controls in place, having effective external, credible testing of these systems and the cybersecurity plans, and ultimately our own auditing and assessment that we'll do as well.
Excellent stuff. Gus, do you want to add quick?
Yeah, just what I was going to add. I mean, and this is a common theme across all regulators where they face staffing challenges. Let's be honest. I mean, it is just not in the cybersecurity area. That they're overworked, understaffed, and
budget.
It's a challenge. And until they can get some of that funding to make the correct hires, get that expertise. There'll always be a little bit behind. But to all those other regulators that are listening today, that's one of the advantages we have. Reach out to us. We're happy to help, just like we help Paul answer his questions. That costs nothing. For my time and Melissa to meet and help give our expertise and guidance. So we're always a resource for the industry. Both regulators, but also operators and suppliers if they have questions about how to meet their cybersecurity needs. So, yeah, I know we're short on time, Joe. So
just wrapping up here, and a reminder, this is pre-recorded, but we will have a live Q&A post the broadcast. So I just want to go rapid fire around the room here with this one question for basically everyone. What final thoughts or recommendations do you have, or just even give me a hot topic for someone to look into for organizations looking to improve their cybersecurity processes? I'll start with you, Lee.
Well, I think from the regulator's perspective, I think one of the most important things you can do is engage the operator when you get the results and follow up, showing that you are part of it and you have a vested interest in the results. Keeps them engaged, and you get better results and better communication. So I think that's one of the biggest takeaways that I've experienced in my 18 months reviewing these.
Excellent. And you, Gus?
I would say think outside the box. Don't let the annual security requirements be the only time you as an operator supplier address security. You just because it's required annually doesn't mean you can't do security more often. You should be doing different types of assessments, even if they're not required. Offensive security assessments, simulated phishing attacks, tabletop exercises. There's a lot more that needs to be done. The regulations are always going to be the minimum level that you need to meet. In order to raise the bar, you need to do more. So that'd be my advice for the audience.
Great. And Melissa, can you add?
I think two points. One for the regulators, for those states that have the regulatory requirements for security and audit work, get the requirements out to the licensees that need to perform the work. Make sure they have adequate time to prepare and plan and get organized to do the assessments. And then for the actual vendors and casinos, it's a work in process. You're not going to become secure overnight. I think getting partners, asking for help, asking your peers in the industry, they're also doing these assessments, and realizing it's not all going to be fixed after one assessment. You're going to have to continuously tune and fix, and gaming is constantly changing and ever evolving, and you're going to have to continue to work in that space and making sure you're safe and secure to protect your players.
Fantastic answer. And Paul, with your final remarks here.
I would just say that in addition to your own information security and ensuring that within your own organization, looking ahead, third-party vendors that you do business with, whether they help you with customer support, whether they help you with information technology, it's really important that our operators and suppliers hold those organizations that do business with them accountable, not just making sure that the required legal language is in the contract, making sure that vendor has adequate security measures in place, but actually going behind that, as we said earlier on the call, trust but verify. Test what they tell you and make sure that their procedures are up to par, using best practices, because something could go wrong at a third-party vendor and it's going to reflect on you as an iGaming operator or supplier.
Thank you very much. Well, that concludes this webinar, and I want to personally thank Paul and Lee from the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board for joining us today, and Gus and Melissa from the surrogate company Bulletproof, and I am Joseph Bunevith from GLI, and now we'll leave some time for some questions post our recording here. Everyone, pleasure was mine. Thank you so much.
Thank you.